I am with Vikram and we're talking about HDR. So tell me a little bit about who you are and what HDR is.
Okay, so I'm Vikram Srivastava. I'm with Sigma Designs. We're a chipset manufacturer for TVs and for set-top boxes. HDR basically stands for high dynamic range. The color systems that were being used in TVs for all these years have been really outdated for decades. They were all based on CRT televisions, and as you all know, we've all moved to flat panels. And so not only that, also the digital cameras themselves have evolved a lot in terms of the colors and the brightness and the gamma range they can capture. And so the whole idea behind HDR is that as we get more bandwidth to the home for delivering content, let's try and improve the picture as well, the way it was captured. So it improves on the color, it improves on the brightness, dynamic range of the picture as well. And all the technologies are in place right now to deliver this to the consumer.
That makes sense. So can you tell me a little bit more about what HDR delivers?
Yes. So the first thing is on CRT TVs, the brightness range only ranged from 0 to 100, and that gave you very few stops from what used to be the brightest you could see on a camera to the blacks. Now we are talking almost about 14 to 16 stops, which basically means you can get to really dark blacks and very bright scenes all at the same time, and the LCD panels can actually deliver that today. Same thing also with colors. The number of colors we could deliver on an old CRT TV were really dependent upon the phosphor being used in a CRT TV, but today's LEDs and OLED technology can deliver millions of colors, and we are going to address both the brightness and more colors with HDR technology.
That sounds good. And tell me more about how the standardization is working in the HDR arena.
Yeah, sure. So HDR is being looked at into multiple standards bodies. There are specific bodies that are focusing on different aspects of HDR. So there is a standard being defined for the gamma curve, which allows you to standardize on the brightness that all the TVs and content need to be calibrated to. There's also a standard on metadata. This is how the data is actually used to process the picture in a TV or in a set-top box. So all of this is happening through bodies like SIMT and UHD Forum, which is putting together a bunch of these standards for a broadcaster to deploy. Even the DVB community is looking at standardization. So there are multiple standards, but even the Japanese ARIBE broadcasting standard is now picking up on HDR, and they're pretty much coming together on a common set of technologies. So we won't see too many HDR standards, but there are already 3 to 4 different ones that are beginning to hit the market recently. So there is the Dolby Visions, that's Dolby's proprietary HDR. We're beginning to see that on some TVs and possibly in some cinematic releases. There's also HDR10, which is the standard being adopted for the Blu-ray, for the ultra high definition Blu-ray. And there's also something new called HLG, which stands for hybrid log gamma. And that's what the broadcasters are looking at, because it's an HDR standard that gives the best backwards compatibility to existing TVs. So the first 2 HDR standards require a consumer to buy new TVs, but hybrid log gamma would actually coexist with old TVs and the new HDR TVs.
Can you summarize for me which standards are gaining the most traction in your words?
In the US, currently we are seeing Dolby Vision gaining a good market share right now with OTT providers like Netflix and a few others that will be soon announced. HDR10 might see some more gain in popularity as the ultra high definition Blu-rays are launched. So right now there are a few titles on HDR10, but we might see that grow as the UHD Blu-ray titles get released to the market. So yeah, definitely we see both proprietary standards and open standards have their play in the market space today.
And what is the content delivery industry doing with HDR?
So this is actually one of the most tricky part of the whole HDR business because the content can be captured by cameras in HDR, but there is a complete workflow that needs to be put in place in Hollywood and the production studios that can take this high resolution, high dynamic range content raw, process it, and put it in a format that can be consumed by consumers. So there's a full workflow that many companies that traditionally supply software and tools into Hollywood and production studios are all coming up with different flows. So of course Dolby has its own flow, but there are many other companies basically doing what they call glass to glass tool flow from the camera to the TV screen, and that whole tool flow is very much in its early days right now. But definitely some studios like Warner Brothers and others have adopted them and moving ahead with HDR content production.
And finally, in delivering HDR to consumers, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face?
So right now the biggest challenge is bandwidth. So there are, as the industry has been trying to move to 4K, that has challenged the bandwidth. HDR challenges the bandwidth a little bit more. So that is definitely one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge is the actual encoder, which is the technology that's used to, in real time, convert the streams to HDR. And the third biggest challenge would be educating the customer on why they need HDR, why they should be going out and buying a new TV. So I think there are quite a few challenges in the industry, but I think the technologies are all in place to make it available to the consumers. We've seen almost every tier one brand in the US launch HDR TVs this year, and next year I think it would be pretty much standard for every 4K TV to be HDR capable.
Super, Vikram, thank you very much for your insights.
Sure, thank you.